Welcome to the Gals Guide to the Galaxy podcast, where a group of gals gather for you one cool thing around our topic of the month. Is it ancient history? Is it breaking news? Is it safe for work? Well, that's up to each gal. All we know is that...
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Welcome back. I'm Bonnie, and I'm joined by Leah, Katie, and Debbie talking about our one cool funny gal. Debbie already talked about Mabel Normand, and Katie and her kitty already talked about Lucille Ball.
I like it.
But before we dive back in, let's get to know something random about our gal pals. Since women aren't funny, I want y'all to tell me one of your favorite jokes.
Dun, 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 dun. Okay, I'll go first because I had to look mine up because I totally blanked on it before. It's become one of my new favorite jokes, and yet I believe part of that is remembering what your new favorite joke is. But mine is from Jean Carroll. Jean Carroll is the comedian from she was very big into the Catskills, so the early 1940s comedian. She's the inspiration for Mrs. Maisel, the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel show. Her timing and the way she tells jokes and the way their slice of life is very much a Jean Carroll inspiration. And Jean Carroll's joke is, geez, I see you have a terrible cold. Why don't you take something for it? And so I said, make me an offer. It's a joke grenade. It's intellectual. It's a joke within a joke. It just takes some time, but I love it. Jean Carroll. I'll be here all week.
Can you add in some snare drum?
Exactly. Or a groan. I'll take a groan. Oh. That was gorgeous.
Okay.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my joke is also a two-part joke because the original joke was not that funny, but it turned into a really funny story. The original joke was a Steve Martin joke from the 80s.
I like it already.
And he was talking and he said, so I knew this girl and her voice coach told her she had to sing from her diaphragm. He's like, I mean, that would take years, wouldn't it? Okay, you got to understand, I grew up in a very sheltered lifestyle. And so to me, the diaphragm is just the part of the stomach.
Right.
I didn't know what another diaphragm was, so I laughed at that because I'm thinking you're trying to sing out your belly button or something, you know. So I tell this joke to other people and they'd always get a big laugh because it's funny. Until I told that story at a Bible retreat.
Oh.
And everybody stares at me. And my very good friend, the pastor, said, Debbie, I can't believe you told that. And for the first time, I got the joke.
Oh.
And
that was a joke grenade then.
Yeah, and I'm like, I am so sorry. And then they realized that I didn't know what I was saying. And then everybody busts up, and it's a hilarious thing. So yeah, the funniest joke was me telling the wrong joke at the wrong time.
Oh no.
A joke that you didn't get into that moment, and that made it even all the more funny.
Absolutely.
I like it.
And I'm blushing telling this story again.
I think it's fantastic. Love it.
Well, I don't have a go-to favorite joke. So I had to do a little Googling before the show. So I'm going to tell a feminist joke and then a joke that I think relates to these days.
Ooh.
Okay. We're going to go feminist first.
Perfect.
How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't know.
No.
None. You don't need one when you have a glass ceiling.
Oh,
nice.
Right.
I approve that message.
Isn't it good?
That was good.
Yes.
And then my second one that kind of relates to these days is by Bill Murray. I
Yes.
think you all know, perhaps love the man.
Yes.
The weirdness that is Bill Murray.
Right. I love weirdness.
Yes.
He says, 20 years ago, we had Johnny Cash, Bob Hope, and Steve Jobs. Now we have no cash, no hope, and no jobs.
Oh no.
Please don't let Kevin Bacon die.
Yes.
Oh no.
I have that on a plaque. In my kitchen.
Oh,
True.
no.
Right?
It's so good. It's so good.
What about you, Bonnie?
Mine's the best joke ever.
Ooh.
No matter
Yes.
what Trey tells you.
I sense a challenge.
What's a pirate's favorite letter?
Arr.
Tis the sea.
Oh.
All right.
I like it. Pandora approves.
I love it. I threatened to, I was like, we were at his Christmas party and I was like, do you want me to tell the pirate joke? He's like,
He's like, no, I have to like leave and change my name. I like it. Brilliant.
oh,
Who do you have for us, darling?
the person I picked for a funny gal is Gilda Radner. Because when I went for the library to pick up some books, I picked up a Gilda Radner book, and I had to look her up. I was like, I don't know who this lady is.
Oh.
She's amazing.
So I was like, I'm going to find out more about this lady.
Cool.
She was born June 28th in 1946. Her father was 53 when she was born.
Oh.
And worked in the hotel apartment business by the time she was like old enough to remember. But it seemed like back in the day, they lived in Detroit, and he may have been involved in some like prohibition, like selling booze to Canada.
Interesting. Fantastic.
She was overweight as a child, but like you see pictures of her as a kid, she's not that overweight.
No.
Like she's not like kids today are like huge.
She was like
no.
pudgy.
She's like a normal child.
Yes, exactly. She looked healthy, is what I think. But yeah.
But her mother and their doctor put her on diet pills when she was 10 years old.
What the shit?
Ooh.
Yeah. They got a housekeeper. I'm not sure what you would call it. Like it's almost like an inherited grandmother named.
Okay.
Oh, she called her Dibby, which eventually became the inspiration for one of her SNL characters.
Ah.
But she lived with him until she was 18, and she just hung out with this little old lady all day, and she loved it.
Nice.
Rent a grandma?
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
They spent a lot of their time they lived in Detroit, but they had a second house in Florida because her mother just could not stand the winters.
Gotcha.
So for between like November and then March, they would live in Florida and come back. So she had this childhood where she was like not really making any friends because she was like there for just like 2 months and would leave and come back. Her father died of a brain tumor when she was 14. He went to the hospital when she was 12 for like a routine medical examination and was just not the same. He had like a stroke while he was there, and she had to just kind of watch him just kind of like wither away. Like he came back, he was not the same person. He was like a shell of a person. So that messed with her. She went to an all-girls school for like middle school and I think high school. Eventually went to the University of Michigan. She did not end up graduating from there. She ended up, I think she met a man. She had a string of like boyfriends, like her whole life. It seemed like she was just like, find a dude and was attached to him. Like she wanted to be like the housewife so bad. Because she talks about her biography. She was like, she wants to have a little farm. Like,
Adorbs.
So she followed him into Toronto, and she was living in Canada for a while with him. They didn't end up getting married, but she stayed in Toronto and eventually joined the cast of Second City in Toronto, where there was Bill Murray and John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and Eugene Levy And I'm sure a lot of really other awesome, amazing people.
Didn't she date Martin Short for a little bit? Like
she
around
did.
that
She
time or
did.
something? Okay,
She
all right, that's what I
dated
thought. Sorry.
everybody.
It was like in my head and I'm like, there's a Martin Short connection
Martin Short, yeah.
somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, that's in
Funny
the
guys
documentary.
are pretty irresistible.
They really are.
That was
Yeah.
the thing. She said she never really went for like a guy who was good looking. Like she wanted the funny guys.
See.
But you have to talk to him.
Yeah. Like she loved a guy that could make her laugh. She was eventually on the National Lampoon show, which I think was it John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd? It had
and
a
Bill
bunch of
Murray.
people.
Yeah, it was like a radio show, but then it became like a video. Yeah.
At one point when she was still in Toronto, she was on this weird show where she was like, I think she was a clown, but then there were also like puppets.
Yeah.
So it sounded like a weird version of Sesame Street.
Or a person's nightmares.
But it was like a religious show, but she was like trying to be funny to the kids. Like, I don't know.
I'm sure it worked.
Yeah. When I see pictures of her, and I think of that show from like when I was a kid. There was like a clown with the big old poofy hair, and she would do like the leg clock thing.
Oh God.
Like that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah. I was on the Bozo show.
Frizzy hair.
Stuff a nightmare.
I forget what
Not
that
a
show
Bozo
was.
fan.
No. My Vietnam. That's why I don't like Balloon.
She eventually was on the original cast of Saturday Night Live. They needed a girl.
Right.
You
Thanks.
gotta have a girl.
I mean, thanks for that equality. There was like her and Lorraine Newman. There was two. It's like
yeah. Two ladies and one black man. Like we're good.
Yeah. Equality.
We filled the quotas.
Yeah. Oh goodness. But yeah, on SNL, she was there for 5 years at least, and she's famous for. It's hard for me to even say it. Rosanna Dana.
Rosanna Dana.
Yes. And another, I didn't get the name of the character, but it's a little old lady that tells the news. That's the inspiration is from her housekeeper, where she hears the wrong word. Like we were watching some at lunch, and they were talking. It was one with Chevy Chase as the newscaster, and he was trying to ask her about all the violence on TV. So she's just going on for like 5 minutes about violins on TV.
Right.
About how it'd be good for children to see all the violins, and she doesn't understand.
I can't remember that character's name either, but I love that character.
Oh, yeah.
But she plays a lot of like youthful characters, and she talks about that, I think, in her book in the documentary about she just felt like a young youthful person. So she was just like she did have an eating disorder while she was in the cast of SNL. Like they had some pressure for her to lose weight, and being on diet pills when you were 10 years old, I'm sure that had an effect on her. She did eventually have a trip to the hospital. After SNL, she had a one-woman show called Gilda Radner, Live from New York on Broadway.
Nice.
That ran for a while. She eventually married musician G.E. Smith.
The G.E. Smith and the Saturday Night Live band.
Yeah, I was going to say, he was the Saturday Night Live band, and it was something else. He was something else by the time she was writing the book, and I forget what it was. But she's married to him, and she got a part in a movie. I believe it was The Honeymooners.
That was a TV show, but I'm sure it was also a movie too.
I'm gonna look it up real quick.
I'm trying to remember her old lady character is what I'm trying to remember what that character's name was, and it's just giving me Rita Hayworth, so I'm gonna give up and put it in the show notes.
Not The Honeymoon. Hanky Panky.
Oh,
it was called Hanky Panky.
Nice,
because of course it was where she met a Gene Wilder, another famous actor dude,
Willy Wonka.
Yes, she was still married at the time, but she knew, like, going to set, she was like, I'm gonna fall in love with this man, and I'm gonna get him to marry me. Like, she's still married.
That farm.
Like,
Right.
But she was convinced, like she knew. She just knew. So they were
Aw.
on set together, and that's when they first met. She did eventually end up getting a divorce from G. Smith, and she lived with Gene for a while. And she was just like a clingy person. Like she needed to be with him all the time.
Gotcha.
And eventually she got a little Yorkie named Sparkle. Sparkle. And they would go back and forth between France. Jean loved France, so they were always going to France.
Cute.
And in one of their trips, they were like waiting to board the plane, and Sparkle was with them. I'm guessing just like carrying him around in a tote bag.
Sure.
But he was walking around the floor, and Gilda was convinced that he ate something off the floor, and they look, and there was some rat poison.
Oh.
So Gilda was
On the
like,
plane?
"Oh no!" Like in the like, I'm guessing the like.
It was the
Oh, what do you call them?
70s.
Well, yeah, it was the 70s.
There's that.
But
yeah.
also, I'm guessing it's the equivalent to like the business class, like executive rooms. I've never
Oh.
been in one of those, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Same.
But it sounded like it was like almost like a little private waiting room.
Oh, okay.
But there was
okay.
like a thing with some rat poison in it, and she was convinced that that Sparkle had
some.
eaten some.
Mm,
And Jean was like, "The dog's not that stupid. The dog surely did not eat that."
right.
And she was just like, I'm gonna take her to the vet. You just go get on that plane. Like, we will meet you later.
Right.
And they took her to the vet, and Sparkle had eaten some.
Oh.
And it was like this weird rat poison where it was designed that they wouldn't just die there immediately, because you don't want dead rats in your airport.
Right.
You want them to go away and slowly dehydrate and die far
Oh.
away from the airport.
Yeah.
So if she hadn't have taken them there, then they wouldn't have known what had happened to the dog.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sparkle would have lost it in flight.
no, they made it sound like it would have taken like several days,
Okay.
but still, it's like.
Yeah.
But when they met up later, Jean came back. I think Jean came back to France or something like that. And he got a ring and proposed to her. When you hear about it from his side of the story, like he was like kind of like, she's clingy, like she cannot, like he was like, I don't know, because he had been married I think twice by this point, so he was not really looking to get married. Like he liked her, but he was like, I don't know. But her being like, no, I'm fine. Like for him, that was like, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But they got married in France, like
Sweet.
It's on the back of the book here.
Oh.
Their wedding photo.
They're so cute. And Sparkle. Oh. Sparkle.
It's so pretty.
Oh my gosh, his tie matches her skirt.
Yeah, he
That's so
I guess got a tie from somewhere, and she got this gray dress because she had already been married before.
Right.
You can't have a white dress.
They're so cute.
And Sparkle, it's not in the photo, but apparently Sparkle had a matching little straw hat.
Love it.
I was very tempted, like reading this. I was like, I could do this next month. For
Exactly.
The pets with
Right.
Sparkle.
You're like, okay, so now I have my wedding planned.
But yeah, they eventually got married, and they were trying to have a baby and not having the best of luck, and they were trying to do in vitro fertilization, where Jean was having to give her shots in the butt every night with hormones.
Gotcha.
They eventually did. They were on a movie set, and she did like notice that she was late, but she ended up having like a miscarriage after like 10 days.
Oh, yeah, trombone.
But she kept having like she didn't really have like the best of health most of her life. Like there was always, it seemed like there was always something.
I mean, I want to point to diet pills, but I mean,
yeah,
that's,
like
Yeah.
that's just me.
no, she had issues with like eating food. Like she had kind of like like she loved to eat food, but she didn't want to gain all the weight.
Yeah.
And I think she did some emotional eating, and she had issues.
Yeah.
But eventually she started getting like some stomach pain, so she's going to her doctors, and they're like, "You're fine, like stop."
Right.
Because she did say
we
she
all
was
know doctors listen to women.
Yeah. But she did also think that she was also a bit of a hypochondriac, but I mean, she went to several doctors and they were like, you're fine. The stomach pains eventually turned into she was like tired, like a lot. So she was thinking like maybe depression. They were thinking it was this weird disease that I had never heard of in like the 50s. I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes.
Gotcha.
It's like it's named after some dude. It sounded like it's a fictional disease. The doctors were like, "Oh yeah, it's this disease that no one actually has, but we're calling it a thing."
Right.
And then she started getting like pain in like her thighs.
Huh.
Like it was just is weird. It turns out it's ovarian cancer, and she had to have I wrote down survey to remove cancer. You take a survey.
I'm gonna need to know.
She had surgery to remove the cancer, and she had to get a hysterectomy involved too. While she was at the hospital, she didn't think about it, but she hadn't looked in any of the mirrors while she was at the hospital. And when she got home, she said she looked like someone that had been in Auschwitz.
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 Yeah. Oh no.
Because she was she had lost so much weight, and she's just like so frail and tiny, and just because they had also while they were there giving her first round of chemotherapy to make sure that they'd gotten it. It was like a 2-chemical process. It was in the early days of that.
Yeah, when it was, I mean, it's still horrible, but when it was, diabolically horrible.
The process that she talks about in the book, it's she checks into a hospital for the night before, and they give her something, and through the next day, she basically sleeps for like 36 hours.
Oh.
Because they basically have her knocked out, and they give her like a combination of her chemo meds and steroids, and then a whole bunch of sleeping pills.
Oh, wow.
And then she doesn't feel good for like 10 days afterwards. And then she's like, fine. They spaced them out like 3 weeks apart. So then she can have a bit of a normal life, but it did not sound good.
I wonder, that almost sounds familiar of like RBG was told to have her treatments done on a Friday night so that she could return to work on a Monday. And I'm like,
oh, yeah, seriously?
But after her,
and she did.
After her 9 treatments, they did a month later did a checkup surgery to see if they got everything, and they took 45 biopsies up in her.
Wow.
Like that doctor was thorough. They found 2 like teeny tiny microscopic things that were like questionable. So they ended up doing more chemotherapy, which is where I'm at in the book.
Oh, gotcha.
But yeah, they hadn't gotten it all, and they did some different kind of chemotherapy where she would only have side effects for like 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
So that may be something more similar to what
RBG had. Yeah. And I can't remember when RBG had it. Yeah. Because she's had a couple of different rounds.
I haven't gotten to it yet. But she dies. I'm assuming it's the cancer.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Her book, this one, was published 2 weeks after she died.
Yeah. Oh. Right.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it says in there, I think there's several things where it's always something. I think it came up with something when she was young. I think it's in some of her SNL characters. Like, I don't know if it's Rosanna and Nana. Always says it's always something.
Right.
Because she said
like
we were watching some clips at lunch, and she said it at one point, and I was like, that's the thing.
That's the title of my book.
Yeah. Before she died, I guess she was talking with Gina about writing a book, and she had suggested the title Kiss Me Like a Stranger. And he did eventually write a book with that title.
Oh.
But yeah, if you want to know,
crap out of her too. That's the thing.
Like yeah, he was there for her.
Yeah.
And I had heard that he had a really hard time when she died.
Yeah.
He did eventually marry another guy, or not another guy.
Did he?
Another girl.
Really?
He got married again like 5 years later, I think.
Yeah.
He hadn't known, but she had left him their house that they had. Like, it was her house.
Yeah.
She had left it to him. In Connecticut, I believe it was on the East Coast. So he was just kind of like, oh, I don't know. He tried it out, and he did end up staying there. He lived there the rest of his life. He was like, I can't live anywhere else. I guess she was buried like 3 miles away.
Oh wow.
But was so adorable.
Aw,
I'm still
excited.
reading the book. I'm almost
Oh, you're so
done.
close.
Oh.
So
But it's a
close.
really good book, and it goes by really, really fast, and she's hilarious. Like, a lot of it is related to her cancer treatments, but there's like little bits thrown in of her life. It's 269 pages with pictures.
Oh,
There's
yes.
Pictures.
With full
There's
color
and
pictures.
sparkles.
Or at least
Yeah,
pictures.
Let's see
Yeah.
if I can pull up. Yeah, like this is supposed to be her chubby as a kid. Like she's
Yeah.
not. She's not fat.
Right.
She's not fat.
Exactly. I know.
Calm down,
It's-
people.
Television is just a mean animal.
And so are your friends that tell you you're fat when you really aren't.
Or your mother in this particular case. Yeah.
That too.
Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, sparkles. Look at all that
Love the
hair.
sparkles.
That's the other thing
Yeah.
about Gilda.
Yeah.
So much hair, and I love it because
Yes.
it's everywhere. It's like just
Hair.
like Jean too. I mean, the two of them
Yeah.
are like poof.
Yeah,
Right.
they made some kind of comment about like they didn't have kids, but they were like, "Oh my God, could you imagine the hair on the kids
What
that
would be
we
the
would
hair
have?"
situation?
Yes.
That would be a 90% hair situation on that kid.
Oh.
But if you want to find out more about it, I would
Katie's
highly
like, I am the offspring that could have been.
Well, I
Like
was
it.
trying for big hair tonight.
I like it.
Yep.
Fantabulous.
But yeah, if you want to know more, we have this book in our library.
We do.
We do.
Yeah.
And then
As soon as
there's
Bonnie
also-
returns it.
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, we have two.
Oh,
We
yeah.
we bought one and then somebody donated one, and I'm like, good, because we need two Gilda
Ta-da.
books, so I'm
Yeah.
down with it.
And then there's a really good NPR interview with Gene Wilder that aired around 2004, and they were replaying it after he died. And that
Gotcha.
talks about, there's a bit that talks about his relationship with her
Aw.
in there.
I'll put it in the
Um,
show notes.
Yes. And then there's a documentary on Hulu. I wrote down the name. It's called Love Gilda. And that's got a lot of the stuff that's in the book. And the book, I haven't gotten to it yet. I downloaded it from the library. The Kiss Me Like a Stranger by Gene Wilder, there's a few chapters in that. It's kind of like short stories throughout his life. So
Oh, okay. Adorable. I like it. Did you ladies watch Gilda growing
I
up and
did.
stuff?
I watched. Okay, I'm showing my age again, but
Do it.
the original Saturday Night Live characters. I
Mhm.
watched it like way back in the day.
You watched it live while it was
Yes.
live?
I actually watched Saturday Night Live live
There you
with
go.
Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner and
Yes.
and Lorraine Newman and Eddie Murphy and all of
When they allowed Eddie Murphy on television.
Yes.
That was the day. I watched it on Nick at Night. So I watched the original
Yeah.
early, and SCTV was the other one too. I actually, a lot of times I thought the early seasons of SCTV, which is the Canadian version of SNL,
Mm.
I thought was funnier than the Saturday Night Live. But Saturday Night Live jokes were a lot of falling down, where the SCTV videos were a lot about language, where, you know, the breaking down, like it was puns and jokes about, you know, the different meanings of a word. So I was kind of more into that. Plus it had Martin Short, which is why I asked about Martin Short, because I really liked Martin Short.
my personal favorite was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So.
And then, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Which I didn't get into until later, actually. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we weren't allowed to watch it, but we
Oh,
had
but
we had a
for
guy
reason.
that rode on our school bus that would like word vomit the whole episode
yeah.
every week. So
See?
we got to hear it all.
There you go. Katie, are you aware of the Gilda Radners before Bonnie's beautiful display of history?
It was a great presentation, Bonnie. She sounds super interesting.
I had to know
No,
better.
you hadn't. No, I really didn't. I barely watched SNL. I know that's terrible.
No, it's fine. Not everybody has to watch it. It's not
Yeah, but-
required American. Like you don't have. You are now an American once you've seen SNL. Like it's not a thing.
If
Well,
you're
my
watching
I'll show you
SNL with your cheeseburger and your
Cheeseburger,
Coca-Cola with nacho
Well, my
cheese.
My parents were pretty restrictive with television growing up. I I think they watched it.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But you can't. That's why
Yeah.
you couldn't watch it, because they watched it.
Right. And I haven't had much cable, but you've definitely inspired me to want to go see these characters.
They're
They're on
adorbs.
YouTubes.
Mhm.
They're on the YouTubes. Okay.
Yes. We were
Check
watching
out the
one
YouTubes.
That
this
reminds me.
afternoon with Gilda Radner being Rosanna Dana
I want to
talking
see
about
Rosanna
the King
Rosanna
Tut
Tana.
exhibit.
Yeah.
The King
Which
Tut
was pretty
exhibit.
good.
Nice.
Oh, by the way, that old lady character, I looked it up. Emily Latella.
Mm.
Oh, okay. I never would have got there in a
Or
million
however you
years.
pronounce it.
Got it.
Yeah, Google is a thing.
Yes. It was just giving me Rita Hayworth over and over and over again because of the movie Gilda, and it's like, okay,
Oh.
fine, internet.
Yeah.
At least it's not trying to tell me that Marie Curie is American again.
Yeah, that's true.
I once had someone they were trying to convince me, the art major, that the Scream was done by Vincent van Gogh. And I'm like, no.
Really?
So they were looking it up on the Google, and I'm like, they were like, see? And I'm like, no, it's
Google wrong.
wrong.
Google, make our work harder.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, do you want to wrap us up, dear Bonnie? I know.
Well, that wraps us up for this week. Join us next week as our next gal pal shares her one cool, funny gal as Gal's Guide to the Galaxy podcast continues. Thanks for listening.
Yay! For show notes, links, and images from this week's show, visit galsguide.org. Want exclusive stuff like deleted bits and major bloopers? Become a Gals Guide patron today. Thanks for listening.